The timber wars that we covered in the early 90s are back, and once again the battleground is the Pacific Northwest and the old-growth forests that environmentalists say are part of our heritage and are irreplaceable. After centuries of logging, they estimate only 5 to 10% of these trees are left, and that cutting them will destroy much of the fish and wildlife that need this habitat to survive. After heavy logging in the 80s, environmentalists went to court and were able to limit cutting of these trees in the national forests. Then President Clinton brokered an agreement between the two sides that resulted in an uneasy peace. It was quiet in the woods for about 3 years. But then Congress passed and President Clinton signed a bill that allowed the cutting to begin again. So trees are falling, the timber industry is making money again, and people are protesting. As we said, the timber wars are back. This demonstration last week resulted in 28 people being arrested for trespassing. 2 weekends ago, an unlikely protester, Scott Stouter, went to his very first demonstration. It was at a place called Toby West Creek in Oregon, just a few miles from his home. What was that demonstration like to you?
I considered whether or not I should do it and decided that yes, I should, that our remaining native forests out there are that critical to the values of life that I grew up with and that I love. And it may seem to some to be at odds with what I grew up with, but I don't see that at all.
What Scott Stouter grew up with was the logging business. This is his own video of him cutting down the kind of old-growth trees he's now trying to save. Following in the footsteps of his father and grandfather, Stouter says he loved working in the woods, as they say in the Northwest.
You know a lot of people who are still in the timber industry. Do you see sentiment changing at all?
Certainly. Most of the people who work in the woods work there because they like the outdoors, they like the salmon, they like the wildlife. As we've progressed in logging, we realize that a lot of the practices that we followed have been detrimental to those values.
Stouter left logging and went back to school. He's now a photographer and outdoor writer. What brought him out to protest and what is causing all the commotion in the Northwest is the cutting of old-growth trees. The timber industry wanted to salvage dead and burned timber from the national forests, so they successfully lobbied for a law that would allow them to salvage this timber. But the bill also contained provisions to cut healthy old-growth timber, cutting that had been stopped for environmental reasons. The new law also made it difficult to stop such logging by going to court, which the environmentalists had done in the past. How did such a bill pass and get signed into law by the president? In Congress speak, it was a rider attached to or riding on another piece of legislation. In this case, timber interests in Congress attached it to a bill they knew the president had to sign, the bill providing relief for the victims of the Oklahoma City bombing. So it came to be known as the salvage rider.
It really, I think, slapped the American public in the face. It said, we're not going to allow you to use 30 years of hard-fought and hard-won environmental laws. We're not going to allow you to go to court and challenge us on this. You've got to stay home and do nothing while we go in and log. And I've never in my life even considered civil disobedience. But after studying this, I've almost considered it. I never thought I'd say that.
And you were a logger for how many years?
25, 20, all my life.
Down the road from Scott Stouter is the Hull Oaks Lumber Company. It's one of the few family-owned mills still operating in the area. Don Oaks and Todd Nystrom are the son and grandson of the founders. What did the salvage rider do for you?
Well, it gave us another hope, another year of hope, and another opportunity to keep going. Stay alive is the name of the game.
Thanks to the salvage rider, Hull Oaks is now cutting old-growth trees at the Toby West site. There's an image that some people paint of people in the timber industry being greedy. How do you respond to that?
We put our boots on just like everybody else.
We never have made that much money.
Yeah.
We make enough money to keep going, that's about it.
We met some people today at Hull Oaks Lumber Company who seem very straightforward, hardworking. you know, salt of the earth people. Not at all greedy, not making a ton of money down there. They don't seem to be millionaires. There are a lot of people like that in the timber industry.
They're good people. I wouldn't argue that. I've always considered myself one of them. But there are boardrooms that don't see individuals, that don't see salmon runs, that don't see forest health. They don't see the value in the diversity of wildlife that exists in a lot of our native forests.
Stouter says one of the things industry doesn't want to see is this, the marbled murrelet. It nests in the old-growth forests and is officially on the endangered species list.
I would question whether or not we need to stop cutting trees in the Coast Range altogether to save the marbled murrelet. I don't think that that's been proven scientifically at all.
Jim Geisinger is president of the Northwest Forestry Association, a lobbying arm of the timber industry.
We believe that species need to be maintained, but we think that that recovery plans for preserving such species need to be based on sound science that has been thoroughly peer-reviewed.
And your scientists, has that been thoroughly peer-reviewed?
It's not all of it. Some of it has.
Where?
And it's, I can't tell you.
Has it been published?
Yes, a lot of it has been published in scientific journals.
Where?
I can't tell you.
So you're saying it's been subjected to peer review, but you don't know when and where?
I personally don't know.
We called the author of Geisinger's research paper, who told us it was not a scientific study, it had not been published or peer-reviewed. 2 days after that interview, we received a letter from Mr. Geisinger which admitted as much, but maintained it is not necessary to stop cutting the old-growth forest to save the marbled murrelet.
Don't move your truck! Shut your truck off, man!
Environmentalists determined to put a stop to old-growth cutting say industry's uncaring attitude toward Mother Nature has caused a backlash. It's radicalized people. This 67-year-old woman locked herself to a truck with a kryptonite bicycle lock to stop a logging operation.
We're being robbed. Your children are being robbed of their heritage as these trees come down. It's total greed, and I'm opposed to greed.
There are environmentalists, some environmentalists, not all, who paint the timber industry as greedy. Unfair?
Yeah, but not totally, because there's still a lot of greed in the timber industry, and it's run by the value of lumber. And in general, mills in the timber industry don't realize the other values that exist out there that a lot of other people see besides tubifores. For 150 years, we've been logging these forests with not even a clue as to what puts them together and what makes things work.
Scott Stouter's not sure if he'll ever go as far as to chain himself to a logging truck, but he does want to continue going to rallies and speaking out against the salvage rider.
It's just a bad piece of legislation. A lot of the bleeding that happened five to 10 years ago in our timber communities was starting to heal. Along comes the salvage rider, which rips the scab off of that old wound and brings up the old animosities and gives hope to those who want to keep the fires burning.
Is there any middle ground between the people in the timber industry who want to cut more and the environmentalists who want to cut less?
Probably not. This has been a long war. Been going on for 10 or 15 years. Some of the leaders in the industry have been fighting this battle for a long time. And some of the leaders in the environmental movement have been fighting this battle for a long time. Now, neither one of those sides wants to lose the battle. And like any battle, they've lost sight of the prize.
Even though the rider is virtually impossible to challenge in court, on Tuesday, lawyers for the federal government and the Sierra Club will go before a federal court of appeals in Portland to do just that in an effort to stop the cutting of 4,000 acres of old-growth trees.